Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our lecture at the Royal Asiatic Society. My name's Michael Willis. I'm a fellow of the Society, and it gives me a great pleasure to introduce Nicolas Revire, who is currently a research fellow at the Art Institute of Chicago. Nicolas has a specific interest in the art and architecture of Southeast Asia, particularly Thailand, and he's been at Chicago researching the provenance of the collections there. He received his degree in Paris and then taught in Thailand at a university there for a number of years. Most recently, and I think a subject that's probably known to us all, we all read the Journal of the Siam Society, and he's the editor. He's also responsible for two very interesting volumes, Beyond Siam and Decoding Southeast Asian Art. I've been pulled up here to introduce him because most recently we have collaborated on a project researching the hospitals of medieval Khmer world for a publication that should appear next year with any luck. Nicolas came to London specifically to look at the papers of Quaritch Wales, who is a personality known to everyone in the Society, at least, a somewhat maverick, I think, in the history of our subject area, but someone who left a great pile of, a great archive behind, which is seldom studied. So I'm very happy that he's, and indeed, we're all very happy that he's come to examine that and extract information for future research. This evening, we will discuss a different sort of topic, and you see the title there. And as you could read it, there's no need for me to read it. And without any further ado, I'll ask Nicolas to give us his thoughts on the subject. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Can you hear me well there? Back? Okay. Thank you very much for being here, for coming. It's a very great honor to be here at the Royal Asiatic Society on my very first visit. Before we start, quick survey. How many of you have been to Thailand? Most of you. Okay, perfect, great. So we'll dive into central Thailand today. As you can see on this illustration, we will talk quite a bit about Nakhon Pathom, particularly, one of the early Buddhist center in central Thailand from the second half of the first millennium. Today's discussion on charting Dvāravatī and the making of an early Buddhist polity in central Thailand is more, not so much about art and architecture and the archaeology of that period, but more about the history of that, the studies, what I call Dvāravatī studies. Okay? So who are the key figures, who discover what, when, and also all these sort of things, including these figures. We must start from the beginning with Prince Damrong Rajanubhab, George Cœdès, the French were there quite a bit, but also Quaritch Wales to a certain extent, which we just discussed, and a few others. We won't have time, of course, to cover them all, so I will focus on really the early part, the foundational period. And the presentation is sort of split in three parts. The first part will cover very quickly what I call the proto-Dvāravatī studies before anything was known about Dvāravatī, which, as you can see, it's not a Thai name, but a Sanskrit name. So we will see how that came to be. And then we'll discuss what I call the birth of Dvāravatī studies, the pioneering period from the first half of the 20th century. And then towards the end, we'll close with some examples of the legacy, what we later scholarship past World War II to this day on Dvāravatī studies. There is to this day continuing interest in the religion, the history, the language, and more broadly the rise of state formation in early Southeast Asia, mainland Southeast Asia specifically. Okay? So that's broadly the plan. And so let's dive in the prehistory or proto-history of the period. It already started in somewhere in mid-19th century at the time of King Mongkut, when even before King Mongkut, Rama IV, became a king in 1851. King Mongkut was before, as some of you may know, a monk for 27 years prior to coming to the throne in 1851. And as part of that, from the 1820s to the 50s, he traveled extensively in the kingdom and surveyed different sites, Buddhist sites specifically, and took an interest for history. Okay, so I really consider him as the foundational figure for the early history, Buddhist history specifically, of the kingdom. Okay? So at the time, the city, which we know now know as Nakhon Pathom, did not exist. Nakhon Pathom, we'll see in a map in a minute, it lies about an hour and a half to the west of Bangkok. But the province at the time was known as Nakhon Pathom. Okay? And there was no modern city over there in 19th century. But with Mongkut, prince, and then later on king, and his followers, they discovered important monuments and things around the region of what we call today Nakhon Pathom. And it's only from the early 20th century that the modern town arose from that. So Nakhon Pathom is a central part. It's been for a kingdom known that we know today as Dvāravatī, more than in a minute. But first the name. Nakhon Pathom is the Thai name which derives from Pali in this case. Nakhon means Nagara, the city, and Pathom is pronunciation for Patama. So, in other words, the first city. Or first in what sense? It could be in historical sense, the first, the earliest city, the most prominent city, the most important. And the reason for that name that was given to the place, again, from the time of King Mongkut, is because of a particular important monument, which you see here, and which we call, I'm sorry, excuse me, which we call Papathom Chedi. So these are the Thai names, and Chedi in Thai derives from Chetia, Chatia, okay? Stupa, the will. So you may have seen pictures, perhaps visited the place. The Chedi, it's known as the largest, the tallest, the most important Chedi in the kingdom, right? And even beyond. There's sort of competition here between the Thais and the Burmese, and between Nakhon Pathom, Papathom Chedi, and the Shwe Dagon in Rangoon, which is tallest and which is largest and which is oldest, of course. In fact, what you see here, it's a modern monument from the second half of the 19th century. Okay, nothing old there. What you see here actually covers, as you see in this mural painting, an older monument, which may be a stupa or chedi from possibly the Ayutthaya period, so anywhere from 15th, 16th, 17th century, and which perhaps, as the tradition told us, encase an even older monument going back to the first millennium or even to the time of King Ashoka or Asoka. Okay. So these are mural paintings, modern mural paintings, which you can see in Nakhon Pathom, showing you Prince Mongkut when he was a monk or a bhikkhu, Buddhist monk, so before ascending the throne from the 1820s, 30s, and visiting on pilgrimage, you've got the date here, visiting the area of Nakhon Chhaisi and discovering ancient monuments, including that ancient stupa or chedi, which was sort of decayed at the time, abandoned in the jungle, sort of. And he made a promise that after ascending the throne, years later, he would go back and, you know, order the restoration, the renovation of that site, which he felt, you know, very important. Must welcome some relics of the Buddha. Okay? So that's really the beginning of the story. And so, as the story goes in chronicles and legends, that ancient monument from probably the Ayutthaya period, sort of Prang style, 16th, 17th century, is believed to encase a Sanchi-like stupa under. There is absolutely no evidence of that. No one has ever excavated to see under to see if there is such a stupa, which would be very unlikely, at least going back to, you know, the Ashoka period. But such is the belief. Okay? So this is an ancient photograph from 6970, around, taken by one of the first French explorer of the region. And here you see the building of that modern monument known that we know today as Prapathom Chedi. Yes.
They didn't look through at all.
Apparently not. Apparently, no. I mean, I don't think that question even come to mind. That we, I'm not aware of any attempt to look at what's inside. It's exit. It's holy. It's so that's Lucien Fournereau, one of the first archaeologists in the region, visiting after visiting Cambodia, came to Siam, as it was known at the time, before 1939, before it became Thailand, and surveying the sites in the region, and that's where he noticed Nakhon Pathom and started to discuss about ancient monuments and artifacts and inscriptions found around there. And so that's still published in Fournereau, Volume 2. We see old photographs of some artifacts which we later consider to be examples of Dvāravatī art. Okay? So prominently, Dvāravatī art is known for their wheels of law made of stone, Dharma chakras, or Tamachak. There are multiple examples of those. If you have been to Thailand in museums, you see them. There are very few. I think there's one at the V&A, of course. That's probably the only one I know in the UK. There's one at the Guimet in Paris, maybe another one in Newark in New York, and that's about it. In New Jersey, sorry. And yeah, they're very rare outside Thailand, but there are plenty. And they date from anywhere from this probably 7th, 8th century Common Era, attributed to that art of Dvāravatī. This will be sort of a pedestal for a wheel, okay? Broken, pieces. Lucien Fourneau, as he was surveying the area, discovered a few inscriptions, ancient inscriptions written in what has been considered Pallava script, but in fact it's just a sort of a late Southern Brahmi type of inscriptions. And this one is written in Pali language, also, or very close to Pali language, not Sanskrit. And so which is the language as we know today, the sacred language for the Theravāda Buddhist. Okay? In Buddhism, you have different schools, but Theravāda is most prominent today in Southeast Asia. This is the famous Yedama formula, which is found all over the place from this period, both in Pali and Sanskrit. And this was read by this gentleman, some of the earliest epigraphy Sanskritists based in Paris, Auguste Barthes. If you visit Nakhon Pathom, Papathom Chedi, and pay attention around, there's many, it's an active site, okay, a temple, there's a lot of pilgrims going there, there's a lot of modern shrines, including this ugly modern Chinese thing, but there is the Yedama inscription that I've just shown you here. This is the same, this is the old photograph. And there it is now on the wall. So this, it's not even in a museum, okay? And there is another modern inscription in modern Thai written by the king, Rama IV, after he became a king, 1856. And basically the king now, after he had promised to come back to Nakhon Pathom and started the restoration, well, there he is, and he's ordering the restoration to happen. And he's sort of in this inscription telling us about what he feels, why this place is so important, okay? And this is an excerpt in translation. And here the king is talking about the inscription, which he has seen, okay? Yedama. Not sure, entirely sure he was able to read it, to decipher it completely, but he felt that these formulas came from Majjhima Pathom, that is Madhya Pradesh, India, and have been sent along with relics of the Buddha, Samanera Gautama, the recluse, and to all Buddhist countries, including Thailand, of course, which was known in tradition as being the land of gold, the Suvarnabhumi. This formula was venerated as king at the time of the great king Asoka or Ashoka, the Ridus king. Okay, so you can see the belief there, going back to this king. Then a few years later, other scholars, archaeologists, French, came, continued the survey and explored a bit more. So this is another attempt by Monsieur Lunet de la Jonquière, who was hired at the time. There was no experts in Thailand or Siam at the time. So the Siamese would hire foreign experts. Quaritch Wales would come later, but before Quaritch Wales was the French around. So Lunet de la Jonquière was hired at the time to come and survey the archaeological remains in the area under the supervision of Prince Damrong, which I've mentioned before. So Prince Damrong was the brother or half-brother of King Chulalongkorn, Rama V, so the one that is following Rama IV. So that put us in the late 19th, early 20th century. And Prince Damrong in Thailand is a well-known figure, prominent figure, and known as the father of Thai history. Okay? He's really the one who brings interest into this, local interest into this ancient history. And Lunet de la Jonquière, surveying these materials, sculptures, and some Buddha images and other deities, start to feel that these are not quite Khmer. This is not Khmer art, which they were starting to explore in French Indochina. It's not Indian, so he would categorize this art from the region, from Nakhon Pathom basically, as a non-Cambodian Hindu sort of group. Okay, that's the French, sorry, but in translation it goes as Hindu sculpture, Hindu Indian, but non-Cambodian, non-Khmer, not knowing really what it was. Okay? Certainly not Thai or Siamese, something else. So what was that? So if you go through these early publications, you find drawings, if not photographs, of several of these masterpieces found in the region, which today are kept in national museums, mostly Bangkok, but also Nakhon Pathom and other places. Modern photograph of a low relief. So this is a four-corner pedestal which was used to host a large Dharma chakra. Okay? And it depicts the Buddha here preaching probably the first sermon. Okay? So this link the Dharma chakra symbol as a symbol of the first sermon of the Buddha. Okay, so we come to the early 20th century. And this is really when Dvāravatī studies will emerge. So, okay, I think it really started with this figure, Prince Damrong Rajanubhab, who was son of King Mongkut, who held several important positions in the kingdom. Most prominently, he was the very first modern Minister of Interior for the Siamese government for a long time, President of the Royal Institute. He sort of created, with the help of another French scholar, which we will talk about in a minute, created the modern National Museum of Bangkok, as we know it today, which previously was part of the royal collection, really. Then he turned it into a public national museum. And he was interested in history, ancient history particularly, and so he's known as the father figure of Thai history. Okay? But really, he was self-taught, okay? As very often in this time. Wrote and published many articles and books and papers, mostly in Thai, but he was conversant in English, and several of these papers, particularly in the Journal of the Science Society, have been given in English or translated into English. Okay. And so I link him to what I consider the birth of Dvāravatī studies, because it's in one of his books. This is the Thai version, but you see English version in a minute, on the wider Buddhist history of the region, where he sort of tried to classify the periods, and the most ancient period of Buddhist history in the kingdom is what he calls Samai Thavaravadi, or the Dvāravatī period. This is the English translation, which appears later. And here we are with the name, Dvāravatī period. Okay? So this is the modern, the English translation, which came much later. But the original Thai was published in 1926. This is, as far as I can see, the first occurrence in publications of the name Dvāravatī. Okay? Was not really known before that, or established yet. Now, how that came to be, we'll see in a moment. But again, we are in this belief. So Prince Damrong was interested in Buddhist history, how Buddhism, when Buddhism came to the region, what we know today as Thailand or Siam. And here his quote is what he says, that Buddhism was first established in Siam, Thailand, when Nakhon Pathom was the capital, may be deduced from the archaeological remains found at the Pathom Shedi there. Okay, so we've seen the early explorers and archaeologists coming around and discovering things, mostly chance finds. There was no scientific excavations conducted at the time yet. Okay? And these things were gathered around the stupa. So the stupa really was, and still is, in a way, a place of gathering for pilgrims, and anything sacred that was found in the area was taken to the stupa. And so he concluded that Buddhism was introduced into Siam probably before 500 BE. So this is the Buddhist era, which after converting will take us to around the 1st century Common Era, which nowadays scholars think is way too early. There's absolutely no evidence for that. But such was the belief at the time. Prince Damrong believed that. And again, going back to the long-standing tradition for the Theravāda Buddhists, going back to some Sinhalese Sri Lankan chronicles, Dipavamsa, Mahavamsa from the 5th century or so, establishing the missions, the Ashokan missions, sending, Buddhist missions all over the world, basically, including one going to the land of gold, or Suvarnabhumi in Pali, or Suvarnabhumi in Sanskrit, and which people in Southeast Asia take as a nomination, an early nomination for their land, somewhere in Southeast Asia. Certainly the Thais believe Suvarnabhumi center was in around Nakhon Pathom or central Thailand. Okay, so this is a modern painting showing you, a temple at Nakhon Pathom, showing you the Pathom Shedi stupa. At the time, going back at the time of the missions of the King Ashoka missions, so you see the monks here coming on boat with the belief that Nakhon Pathom, ancient Nakhon Pathom, was sort of a seaport and standing very near to the sea, which is not the case, certainly not today, but even in 1st millennium Common Era, there's no way this was the case. Maybe 10,000 BC, yes, but not 1,000 years ago. Okay, so there's some corrections to be made here. Interestingly, in an English translation of Damrong's book, there's a footnote by probably the editor. I think he was the editor, if not the translator, Mr. Griswold, a famed American scholar from 50s, 60s. And the footnote says, not a single example of Dvāravatī art can be dated earlier than the 6th century AD. Okay? So sort of assumptions made by Prince Damrong. By the time, I think Prince Damrong had already passed away, so no less majesty here. In other talks and publication, Prince Damrong sort of moved over the idea of, where was, the real center for Buddhism at the time, and land of gold, etc., etc. Thais, but also Burmese and Khmer, I can tell you, all have a fascination to locate the land of gold center. They're all competing over. The Thais say this is here, Burmese say no, the land of gold is there, etc., etc. In fact, we don't really know, of course. But here is Prince Damrong expressing himself. And so that's by 1919, further up. And at this time, he considered another site known as Utong, you see a map, which now he considered possibly as the center of so-called famed land of gold, Suvarnabhumi. Simply because the name Utong in translation means cradle of gold. or repository of gold. These, of course, are modern toponyms. Okay, doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean that 2000 BC, 2000 years ago, it was the case. Okay, the other important figure for the first half of the 20th century is George Cœdès, Professor Cœdès. Old French, appointed, he became a member, prominent member, and later director of the École Française d'Extrême-Orient, EFAO, which headquarters at the time was in French Indochina, Hanoi. And the idea was to hire these experts and in a region and study the local history, archaeology, and inscriptions, etc., etc. Okay? But the center at the time was really French Indochina, of course, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos to a lower extent, not Siam directly, or Thailand. What happened is that George Cœdès was hired again by the Siamese government, Prince Damrong prominently, who had say and a pick. He met Professor Cœdès, and he had a need. The Siamese government had a need for an expert to work in their national library. The former head of the national library just left. It was German, by the way, and during World War I, and so they needed someone else, a curator, conservator, director, to look after it. And so this is when the Prince Damrong asked George Cœdès to come and join. Okay, and so George Cœdès became the new curator and stayed there for a good 11 years in Siam, not only looking at the library, but also taking a gradual interest into the archaeology of the region, specifically Siam, and inscriptions, of course, because George Cœdès was trained as a philologist and Sanskritist and epigraphist. So his mission was twofold: to publicize and publish new discoveries made in the kingdom of Siam, and then to study it and classify it, research it, and decipher the inscription, etc. Only later that he left Siam in 1929 and then became the FAO director in Hanoi, and then he had the career that we know, published so many books, turned his interest back into Cambodia and other things. Okay? He would come back to Thailand as not to live, but in his academic interests much later in his career, as he was retiring, as he was going back to France. And this is when he made major contributions in what we call Dvāravatī studies. So George Cœdès and Prince Damrong really worked together in collaboration, in tandem. Prince Damrong asked George Cœdès to join, and George Cœdès was the expert, really. So we don't often always have, information on who said what and who was first with George Cœdès, but we must assume that in most cases, when it comes to academic stuff, it was George Cœdès really leading, giving away and reading the inscription, etc., which Prince Damrong may or may not have taken away. So George Cœdès in 1922, as he was based in Bangkok, gave a public lecture at the Siam Society. And that lecture was on what we call today votive tablets, small molded terracotta tablets, which you have seen. They are popular in India, but they're also very popular, or they were in the first millennium popular in mainland Southeast Asia, particularly in Thailand. And so the talk was given in French, but it was published later in a journal, and there are different versions. It's been translated in English and in Thai as well. The Thai version is sort of fairly different. It's presented as a chronicle. It's more a tamnan, sort of a legendary account of what has been actually said in the French or English version. But in this paper, George Cœdès, looking at this fairly new recent material from the first millennium, started to classify what he understood at the time for the history of the region. And in his early publication, he classified a group of objects, specifically tablets, molded tablets, as what he calls at the time, for, because he had no other names, Nakhon Pathom group or subgroup of objects. Didn't know what to call it. Dvāravatī was again unknown at the time. So these are the sort of tablets that we are talking about, so these are types you find around Nakhon Pathom, but not only, in fact, you find them in other archaeological sites in central Thailand and beyond. Okay, some carry inscriptions in Pali, Yedama. A couple of years later, Cœdès published a volume of selected reading from inscriptions found in the kingdom. And there are 2 volumes. This is, if I'm not mistaken, the second volume, deuxième partie, which is dedicated to now Dvāravatī, Srivijaya, which was another discovery made by George Cœdès, was the first person almost to read the Srivijayan inscription from the Malay Peninsula in Indonesia, and Lavo, which is also known as Lopburi for Thailand. Okay, so in this volume, he collects a selection of inscriptions from basically Thailand, early Thailand, and this is when we see for the first time in publications the name Dvāravatī. And the reason for that at the time was because Cœdès referred back to some Chinese chronicles from the Tang period, 7th century, which the Tang sent, they had received tributaries from different, and polities from Hunan, Chenla, so those are the early polities in Southeast Asia, and Wolopoti, which is a Chinese pronunciation for Dvāravatī in Sanskrit. Okay? So it's not Cœdès who made this discovery, but with his sinologist colleagues, I think Chavan and others, they started to hypothesize the possibility that Wolopoti refers to Dvāravatī in Sanskrit, which may be located around Nakhon Pathom. But there was no evidence of that yet. It was just an hypothesis. In that volume, George Cœdès published inscriptions like this on the pillars. So these are pillars which upheld the wheels, the Dharma chakras. And this one has an inscription. There's 2 types of inscriptions from this early period. Number 1, Pali inscriptions, Buddhist, citation inscriptions, citing the text, Yedama mostly, or the 4 truths of Buddhism, or stuff like that. And this is the case here, what we call donative inscription, and which means not Pali, not Sanskrit, but the language that everybody's everyday's language people use on everyday basis, and which was not Thai, which was not Khmer, but which was Mon in this case. So this pillar was found in Lopburi, another important site from central Thailand. And so slowly, George Cœdès and his colleagues started to map these inscriptions from early first millennium and started to map an early phase of history of Thailand, where the Thais are not yet present. As we know, the Thais came much later in 12th, 13th century, millennium, but was occupied by mostly Mon people. So Thailand was Mon land before, in the first millennium, at least the central part. So these donative inscriptions basically gives names of people and names of objects or things that were offered to a temple or to a monastery to make merit. Okay, so boring list of slaves and cattle and things that were offered to the temple at the time in Mon language. Here, interestingly, we have a letter, a correspondence in English between George Cœdès, Professor Cœdès, based in Bangkok, and Prince Damrong. So they will, if they will not meet on a daily basis, at least they will exchange by letters, formal letters, regularly. And this is one example where George Cœdès, probably as he was preparing his book on inscriptions, where he inquired on the exact origin, the provenance of that pillar that was said to be from Lavo or Lopburi. So he inquires if we know more about the exact provenance, because this is a very important historical evidence to locate the Mons in this area. Okay. This is a photograph of Prince Damrong, letter, this is 1922, with his two daughters, standing by. I think this is taken at the National Museum, probably, or the National Library in Bangkok, standing next to that pillar that we just mentioned. Okay. So this is part of the masterpiece of an important historical evidence for that period, which is kept today in Lopburi Museum. By 1928, George Cœdès sort of conducted, he was not an archaeologist himself, so he was assisted by professional, shall we say, archaeologists, but he was sort of directing, leading some of the very first excavations that was done at the time of a site west of Bangkok, in what is today Kanchanaburi province, or even further west of Nakhon Pathom, not very far, 30 minutes away, known as Pong Tuk. I was glad to, this afternoon, as I browsed through the Quaritch Wales papers, you see that later, a few years later, Quaritch Wales, British archaeologist, also went to Pong Tuk and conducted further survey and excavations. But the first one was Cœdès and his team. And they sort of excavated some ancient bases of monuments, perhaps probably Buddhist, Buddha images, bronze, but also Vishnu images, a mix of Hindu-Buddhist, and importantly, this sort of Roman Byzantine lamp found in the region, so showing some possible network of exchange. I could have shown this example in our panel recently, but exchanges of objects from the Mediterranean world to Southeast Asia. Unlikely there was any direct exchange, but through India, etc., etc. Somehow this lamp, Byzantine lamp from the 5th, 6th century, came all the way to be found in this site in Thailand. George Cœdès also was prominent in the organization and establishment of the new National Museum of Bangkok, formally opened, I think, around 1927, 28, and he published the first and the last catalog that we know of, proper catalog for the museum, National Museum. There is this is in French, there is a Thai version of it, no English. Of course, the collection has evolved tremendously since its opening nearly 100 years ago. But so, George Cœdès was prominent in that endeavor. So these are some plates that are published and objects that were displayed for the first time to the public by 1928, and displaying different periods of time. And these were objects, Buddha images, Dharma chakras, deers associated to the first sermon, found around Nakhon Pathom or other ancient sites, perhaps Lopburi, Utong, etc., which are now linked to Dvāravatī. This is George Cœdès way later in his career, as he was director of the FAO in Hanoi, continuing his work on inscriptions of the region, etc. And by 1950s, and he passed away in 1969. By 1950s, he started to pick up a new interest again in Dvāravatī. In 1952, he published this paper. Sorry, it's all in French. Very few has been translated in English. Okay? Some in Thai, but and this is an important benchmark because for the first time here, he published inscriptions found in Nakhon Pathom in Old Mon. Here it is, fragments. So the script is similar, late Brahmi type, but this time around, it's not Sanskrit, it's not Pali, it's Old Mon. Okay, and these were found in Nakhon Pathom. So that was the first time we found Old Mon inscriptions in Nakhon Pathom. We had seen the example from Lopburi, but this time in these are from Nakhon Pathom. So it became clear to Cœdès, at least, that Dvāravatī kingdom was actually a Mon kingdom, and Dvāravatī art was to be quoted as Mon art. What Lunet de la Jonquière earlier, decades earlier, called non-Cambodian. They didn't know. Cœdès also published new inscription that was discovered, this time around in Pali, inscribed on the spokes of these Dharma chakras. And these inscriptions are referring to the four truths of Buddhism. The Buddha talked about dukkha, suffering, and then the origin of suffering, and then the path, eventually the path to end suffering. And then comes the revelation, which will interest Joe Cribb here in attendance, the new numismatic evidence that came out. So it took, so this is published in 1963. It took nearly 40 years of the career of George Cœdès, and not to mention the previous scholars, to really, for the first time, confirm the existence of a kingdom, a polity known by the name of Dvāravatī. And these we found inscribed on the reverse of some very small, they're very small coins or medals, I think we can call them rather, not commercial medal, coins, but rather votive medals, coins, with some auspicious symbols on the obverse, in this case, the cow and the calf, sometimes something else. And on the reverse, the Sanskrit inscription, which always read the same, Sri Dvāravatī Shvara Punya. So that's a Sanskrit compound, which has been translated by George Cœdès the first time, the merit of the king of Sri Dvāravatī. Okay. So the Ishvara here refers to the Lord, in fact. Okay. In this case, we must understand king, a ruler. Punya, of course, is the merit, the work of merit. That is familiar to all Buddhists, but not only Buddhists, as I argue elsewhere. There is no evidence here that that king ruler was actually a Buddhist, but that's a separate issue. And of that polity known as Sri Dvāravatī. Actually, in you're a little bit familiar with Vaishnava mythology, you would know that the Lord of Dvāravatī is Krishna, or Dvaraka, as it was known in the Puranas, etc. Okay? But that's a separate argument. And so from that time onwards, towards the end of his life, George Cœdès, as he was publishing, popular books and articles on the early history of the region, he started to publish more and more again on Dvāravatī, Les Mon de Dvāravatī, for example, or À la recherche, searching for the kingdom of Dvāravatī, where he, to the public, write about all these new discoveries that just happened. Another scholarly article that he published in 58 refers to this inscription found this time around, not in Nakhon Pathom, but in Utong, which I have already referred to, a bit to the north, in Supandoi province today. It's a copper sheet inscription, the only one, quite very unique, found in the region. And it's in Sanskrit, a donative inscription by a certain king, we must presume, ruler, known by the name of Harshavarman, grandson of King Ishanaraman. So that's becoming very interesting because those who are familiar with local regional history, Ishanaraman, the first at least, was the famous king, first king of Chenla, 7th century, very powerful king in Ishanapura or Samaprekuk today. So is it possible there was some intermarriage or something happening here? We don't really know, but that's interesting that we found this inscription way to the west of Chenla. We have no names of Chenla kings, presumably. But this inscription is no Buddhist at all. It's actually a donation to lingams. So this in the map sort of shows you sites that we've discussed, Nakhon Pathom to the west of Bangkok. The white dots here shows you the modern towns, the modern cities. Of course, Bangkok did not exist in the first millennium, neither Nakhon Pathom. The yellow dots shows you where these medals or coins have been found with the inscription Sri Dvāravatī Punya, and you clearly see a pattern here, north-south on the Tashin River, west of Bangkok. So whoever that Lord of Dvāravatī was, is seen to have made offerings here in their region. So that's a good start to sort of map Dvāravatī domain, if you will. The copper inscription just mentioned was found here, Utong. Yeah, okay. And this is Chenla, as we know it, 7th century or so. 7-8. All right. So what has become of Dvāravatī studies after Cœdès, particularly after the 1960s or so? Briefly. So we have touched on other figures such as Quaritch Wales, maybe familiar to you here. He was a grandson of a bookseller, to begin with, educated here in the UK. I think he went to Cambridge also, if I'm not mistaken. And fairly young, he went to Siam from his first marriage and to work for the Siamese government. I'm not exactly sure what he was doing there, but he sort of advised, he had a prominent position. The kings at the time, King Rama VI, and then later on Rama VII, he actually attended the consecration ceremony of King Rama VII in 1926. And this was the basis for his PhD dissertation. Siamese state ceremonies published later in 1931. Okay? So he spent a few years in Bangkok. He actually studied sort of formally, informally with George Cœdès. So George Cœdès was his sort of mentor at the time. So he had good training and become interested in local history. So he became the Orientalist that we know today. And this is again a time, a period where, you know, almost nothing was done and written about. Okay? So Quaritch Wales later in 1935, 36, 37 had a chance to come back to survey, this time on a mission. So I think he was appointed field director of the Greater India Research Committee. Not exactly sure where was his base, but he went back to Siam and also Malaya, it was known at the time, to survey and excavate also new sites. He went to Sitep, was the first foreigner to go to Sitep and made discoveries. I found quite interesting photographs by him and field note book here in archives, so that's quite important. And beyond Siam, he went to survey all other places in British India at the time, and Malaya, and then return to the UK after World War II, and continue writing and publishing his things and his books mostly. He became vice president of his Royal Asiatic Society, and it's in 1994 that his widow, Dorothy, his second wife, Dorothy Quaritch Wales, bequeathed his papers and photographs to the society. And also, I think, although I've not had a chance to see, but a few artifacts, a Thai sculpture, I think there is, and other small things that he collected and that was given to the Royal Asiatic Society. Okay. So he published extensively broadly on Southeast Asia, early Southeast Asia, including a book toward the end of his life on Dvāravatī. Okay. So he also got the interest in this early period, as they were discussing Indianizations and sort of things at the time. Okay. So those are the books by Quaritch Wales, which when I entered the field, I read all of these books, of course, by Cœdès and Quaritch Wales, etc. His Buddha image, giant Buddha image, is kept at the Bangkok National Museum. It came from Nakhon Pathom. Yeah, and following this first generation of scholars on Dvāravatī came the successors, the disciples. So in addition to Quaritch Wales came Pierre Dupont, a French scholar, who sort of worked in the footsteps of George Cœdès. But Pierre Dupont specialized in early Thailand as well. And he is the one, he was hired by the EFAO and conducted excavations in Nakhon Pathom, scientific excavations in 1939, 1940, just before World War II break. And yeah, and published books. And unfortunately, he passed away rather young. So, but his books basically were published posthumously after he passed away. So this is Pierre Dupont here, standing with his team in front of the monument just excavated in Nakhon Pathom, Wat Pramen. L'archéologie monde de Dvāravatī is a classic, very meticulous study, archaeological report, which nobody published anymore. Okay, so here it tells you, we found this exactly at this site, at this place, etc., etc. Very, very rich in details. And he offered for the first time a complete typology of Dvāravatī sculpture. So he was more into Buddhist art, Dupont, unlike George Cœdès. And he gave, a typology for the first time about Buddhist art in the region. Then came others. So by 1964, George Cœdès was quite old, but he managed to co-curate an exhibition in Paris on Thailand, Thai art, along with another prince, son of Prince Damrong. So now we're talking about Prince Discool, Ubada Discool on the Thai side, and a new become a prominent art historian, Jean Boisselier, prominent art historian for Southeast Asia, but particularly Thailand and Cambodia and Vietnam. Here he is, later in his life. And here he is again, young Jean Boisselier, excavating, if we shall say, with his colleagues in new sites, in this case in Utong and other places, Kubo in 1960s onwards, and published extensively, but again, mostly only in French. okay, including this new research at Nakhon Pathom, where he rediscussed a site that was first excavated by his predecessor, Pierre Dupont, and where he made additional discoveries there. And in this paper, Jean Boisselier retell the history that I've briefly mentioned at the beginning, around the history of the Prapathom Chedi and Nakhon Pathom, from the legends to more recent discoveries. There's a chocolate box, which I found interesting. Chocolat Pupier, showing you as a postcard the Prapathom Chedi here, an important Buddhist stupa. Yeah, more recently, I think I shall stop there with this still living another mentor of mine, Professor Ajahn Piriya Krairiksh, leading art historian, still active. I mean, he's over 80, but he still writes and publishes books. We published recently his Festschrift. Graduated from Harvard University, and he did his PhD dissertation on a site in Nakhon Pathom. Okay, so very much rooted in Dvāravatī art. Published extensively, is quite controversial, at least in Thailand, because he proposed new ideas. So I won't go into the details here. He taught for many years at Thammasat University, the place I also taught before moving to Chicago. And yeah, and he was the president of the same society for some time. Here's the book that I edited in his honor. So that's a Festschrift to Piriya Krairiksh with papers. Yeah, did you contribute to this? No, you did not. Okay. You were in the previous book before Sayam. But that's on the book cover is a really very fine Dvāravatī relief found in Nakhon Pathom, but removed in a temple in Bangkok, Wat Sutat. If you've been to Wat Sutat in Bangkok, it's there. And it's interesting. There is a chapter there, my own, discussing this relief, fine Dvāravatī relief, showing the great miracle of Sravasti. Yeah. We finish with the Ajahn Piriya and just give you some hints at the controversies and questions he raised recently, and I think this is the topic of a new publication that he's working on. He's proposing that the center, the capital, if you will, of Dvāravatī was not Nakhon Pathom, as everyone else believed, or even Utong or Lopburi, but Itep. So more on that, I think, in a forthcoming book of himself. Yeah, and these are recent titles and publications on Dvāravatī. If you're interested, this is the edited volume I did 10 years ago before Sayam. Some good, some less good, but never mind. The Guimet Museum in 2009 did a show dedicated to Dvāravatī. Some of you have been. More recently, Lost Kingdoms in New York at the Metropolitan had a large section on Dvāravatī, etc., etc. So you can see it's not been forgotten. The problem is there are less and less people specialized in Dvāravatī these days. Okay. All right. As to conclude, then we open up to discussion. What are the historical evidence we have for Dvāravatī? We can say, thanks to all these scholars I've cited, that in the second half of the first millennium, in what is today central Thailand, there's at least one person, a ruler, a lord. We don't know exactly his name. We don't know how long he ruled for, whether it was just him or several. But one lord styled himself as the Lord of Dvāravatī. which in my understanding is a metaphor to Krishna. It's like he identified himself as Krishna, or Vishnu, if you will. We have seen several examples of Pali inscriptions, not Sanskrit, or the Buddhist inscriptions from central Thailand, which again is a hint to Theravāda Buddhism in origin. That's quite an important fact. Well established, coexisting, of course, with Brahmanism and Hinduism. We must not exclude Buddhism and separate Buddhism and Hinduism, of course not. And we have seen that at least portion, not the main larger portion of the population at the time in this area, as we know from their donative inscriptions, used the Mon language as their vernacular. So therefore, we should think that they were Mon, they were spoke Mon, and we don't know if the rulers were Mon, maybe not, but that is another story. Okay? Well, there's still many other things we still don't know, and I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for a very stimulating lecture. You intimated you're willing to take questions. Yes. Well, I found it very interesting how the history sort of segued to the modern players in a very natural way and showed the connection between the pioneers and those working on the subject in the present. So I have the pleasure of being the chairman. I also have the pleasure of asking the first question. It's quite interesting that the first appearance of the term Dvāravatī appears in a Thai publication by the prince whose life you have summarized. The question is, how did he come to know?
Yes, in fact, if we go back more in details in the chronology, I think it was George Cœdès who proposed the hypothesis in his book published in 1924, the second volume of Inscriptions, where he made the hypothesis that perhaps Dvāravatī is Dvāravatī, and that corresponds to Nakhon Pathom. And then Prince Damrong took this up in his book on Buddhist history of the region, and one of the chapters is titled the Dvāravatī period. Certainly, in my mind, I think this came from George Cœdès, which probably got, discuss the idea with his colleagues working on Chinese, such as Shavan.
Interesting how it came to be verified.
Right. So we had the Chinese indirect sources on something called Dvāravatī, somewhere in the region, but people could not locate it then.
Yes.
So it was Cœdès who proposed that maybe this is Nakhon Pathom, and which was later confirmed.
So questions, yes.
My memory is a bit faded these days. It seems that Prince Damrong first to launch on Thai state basically the Buddhist foundation, making sure the Cambodians on the terms were excluded.
Yes. Is that a question? A question?
That was interesting. Michael, reading up the following killings, something like that.
Well, it was the building of a nation state. I mean, clearly, history was used as a propagandist to this day. It's nothing new there. Definitely. There are writings by Prince Damrong where... Oh, yes, definitely. Right. Yeah, Cambridge.
Any other? Yes.
When Damrong hypothesized that kingdom then 500 years, can't be Buddhist here, but then Quaritch Wales footnotes.
Griswold, yeah. Did he do that? He's saying that the sculptures are. Thank you. The sculptures are far too late for that. Is that by? Did he take these by directly comparing them to well-known Indian sculptures? So what is the source for Damrong's early dating, right? Yeah, well, and Griswold's hypothesis saying that no, he's got it wrong. Is he taking that from what he knows about Indian art? We must make clear that from this period, there is no absolute dating for the art and architecture. There's no dates on monuments and inscriptions, even, or Buddha images, etc. So these are relative dating. So Griswold put it somewhere in the 6th century, he said, right? Today, we may say 7th, 8th century, and different authors, different suppositions. So these are all subjective dating. Okay. Prince Damrong has his own view based on earlier traditions and legends. Yeah, but as I was reading Quaritch Wales and opinions for reading the inscriptions and dating the early inscriptions at that time, in the 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s, famous epigraphies, etc., would date certain inscriptions I've shown you to the 4th century, 5th century, which is very unlikely today. We sort of push back a little bit more to the 7th, 8th century now. But again, this is all related.
Any connection with the Shanavaman? Sorry. The connection with the Shanavaman also puts it in the 7th century as well.
So we have, some sort of concordance here and there, stylistic and historical evidence names. We've got the Chinese chronicles talking about Dvāravatī, and that's it. So I myself, I am very conservative. I follow whatever written inscription or evidence we have, and I tend to limit the span or whatever is Dvāravatī to the 7th century, and not much beyond that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about the fact that you have Mon in southern Burma and in Thailand. Does that inform us in any way about the nature of the Dvāravatī state?
I mean, there's been, I don't think it's been settled, but who comes first, the Mon in Lower Burma or Central Thailand? For a long time, there was absolutely no archaeological evidence really from Lower Burma, from Myanmar, to confirm their presence in the first millennium, especially inscriptions with Old Mon language. I don't see any problem here to see a certain of Mon populations all the way to the northeast of Thailand. We do have Mon inscriptions. We found Mon inscriptions from northeast Thailand, but we do not find Pali inscription in northeast Thailand. We do not find the wheels of the law, etc., other things that we today associate with Dvāravatī. So I don't like to extend, a great Dvāravatī kingdom that goes from Lower Burma to all the way to Laos. Okay, I'm very restrictive in my description, and I think we have to think of a model with several, polities, small kingdoms, polities, call it mandalas, they call it different way, and a population mix made of Mon Khmers,
I mean, I asked the question because the coins in Thailand are derived from the coins in Burma.
The one that
so the movement of coinage is
right. The one, not the one that's shown, but
the other one.
Early types, yeah. The thing is, the one with the inscriptions, you find those only where.
Yeah, there's nothing in Burma of that kind.
Well, there is one, but it's problematic. We don't have a context on it. And...
Thank you, Nicolas. Could you expand a little bit on how you want to use the name Dvāravatī? You referred to Krishna and so on. Do you think of it as a name for a place, a kingdom, state, or an epithet, or can you
Yeah.
expand on that?
Yeah, I've published on that. I can share with you the paper, but just like today, kings of Thailand style themselves Rama. And Rama, as you know, is the, seventh avatar of Vishnu, Rama 1 to Rama 10, starting with Rama Kameng. And the capital was Ayutthaya. Actually, Ayutthaya is the capital of the city of Rama. In the same way, I think, this is what we're seeing here with the Lord of Dvāravatī, whoever was that ruler, he styled himself for, he compared himself as Krishna, another avatar of Vishnu. And doesn't have to surprise us. I mean, we see this happening in India all the time. Actually, there's some interesting comparisons from Western India as well. So sort of Vaishnava cult, and I allege that these rulers were not necessarily Buddhist, and quite the contrary, they were probably not. And there's no problem for a ruler, a Vaishnava ruler, say, or even Shaiva, to make offerings and make merits to a Buddhist monument. No problem at all. Doesn't make him Buddhist. Okay.
Yeah, and in that regard, the Ronald Inden wrote a very interesting paper about religious and social hierarchies in medieval India to help explain this complex polity with different religious orders in it, and the kings not necessarily participating or even being part of what the population, and it could cycle around and so forth. It's
could be Buddhist.
Quite an informative paper, which I don't think has had the traction it really deserves. But anyway, I've got one more question.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Nicolas. I was just wondering, when Cœdès has his probably idea of writing a history of the development of the art in Thailand, and Prince Damrong has one that he wants to more, formulate towards a national narrative, and maybe also found in Buddhism, that Buddhism.
Oh, yeah.
Is there any correspondence? Do we know of any disagreements between the two? Yeah.
Not that I've seen, really. I would think most of the time, although we don't really have, all this evidence, but I would think that Prince Damrong certainly respected the opinion of George Cœdès. That's why he hired him for. But nevertheless, yes, even Cœdès thought that in his writings that Dvāravatī was a sort of a Buddhist kingdom. Okay, so until very recently, most people believe it was a Buddhist kingdom, sort of a state religion, which I sort of disagree with, but that's a separate issue.
Right, well, on that note, only remains for us to thank you for a very stimulating lecture. And yes, we're offering a refreshment afterwards. Thank you very much. How many people joined online?
People online can't ask
Hello.
Hello.